Folks, welcome back to another episode of Second Print Comics. This week, we are bringing you, friend of the show, fan favorite, comic book creator and artist, Matt Battaglia. Matt, it has been far too long. How goes life?
Good. We moved recently. I have a new baby. I have a new book. It's Things are going pretty well.
It's a
I'm
lot of
so happy
newness.
to be back. Yeah, a lot of newness. I'm happy to be back. Happy to talk to you. Um, it's I can't complain really.
Well, that's always a good position to be in. Matt,
hmm
you've got a brand new book that's currently available for pre-order on Amazon, House on Fire. Folks, I will go ahead and leave a link in the show notes so you can go ahead and pre-order your copy like I did as soon as the show is over or during it if you're a multitasker like some of you claim to be. I'm still waiting for a lot of those 5-star reviews, but I'll leave it at that. Matt, I've been a collector of your books going back to Indoctrination in
hmm
2015, 2016. And I gotta say, I thought I had an idea for what House on Fire was going to be because a lot of your work in the past has usually been in like this crime, realist structure. And, with the art style, like you've established a Battaglia style that when people
hmm
see it, they know it if they know your work. Um, this was different. And I say that in all the best ways. For House on Fire, and we'll get into a few of the questions in a moment, but let me just say this. House on Fire, as I was reading through it, it's about 100 pages, folks.
Yep.
Um, you this is the first book that you actually wrote yourself and you did the artwork for. So that also
Yeah.
kind of stood out. But like
hmm
you do comics now the way that James Mangold does movies.
Oh, I appreciate
And
that.
I say that in the best way because it took me back for a moment. I'm like, this is not the regular stuff Matt usually does, but it was just really freaking good. So let's
Thank you.
just start here. Tell us a little bit about the story. What was kind of like the origin story before it? Did you always
Mhm.
have, this structure in mind? Did you always know where you wanted to go with it? Was it something that recently came about? Let's go ahead and start from there.
Um, one, I appreciate all the compliments. It means a lot to me. The book started in May 2020. And I actually ended up doing like three different drafts of it. And really making the book was my way of sort of processing the past sort of 2 or 3 years. And I think that, my hope is that people can feel a lot of what I think everyone's kind of went through in it. But the core question of it is what do you do to help someone that you love, and how do you, what lengths are you willing to go to, and what happens when you're pushed to your limits, and you know where do you, you know how do you survive? So it's definitely like a realist piece. And so I guess the first draft of it was very city set, and then I kind of changed things. I went on a road trip with my dad in July 2020. We drove from Philly down to San Antonio, and it just, you know as you drive through the country, you kind of see this stark difference between cities and rural, and you kind of think of that whole divide. And that kind of clarified the story for me, beyond what I was originally drafting. And so it took a couple different iterations, and I stripped parts out of it and simplified and simplified until I got down to what House on Fire is. And yeah, I mean, it took a little while to do it. I actually honestly wrote all the dialogue last. That was the last thing I did. I drew it and I knew what I wanted everyone to say, but I didn't put that, I don't script things, if that makes sense when I do a comic. I kind of write notes, and then I lay out all the pages and I ink all the pages, and I feel like the ink is where the story really comes to life.
Yeah, I
Um
mean, I think where I found your book refreshing And very few people out there are like this in mainstream comics. I mean, the only other person I could say understands that even as a writer that comic books are a visual medium first is
Mhm.
Chip Zdarsky, who's probably been my favorite writer since he really jumped out of Image in like 2019 2020. Zdarsky's the one that it's like, he's a great writer, he's great dialogue, but he reels himself back and allows the artist to do their job.
Well, because he's
um
also an artist, and I mean,
yeah.
he's a great cartoonist. So I miss I would I miss him writing and drawing his own, or I miss him drawing more of his own things. I think he's one of the few cartoonists who could actually do comedy well. It's such a hard thing to do, but Sex Criminals with Fraction, like the first few
Oh, that was
volumes of that were
so funny.
hysterical. And
Public Domain,
yeah,
which is one of his
I have to
books
read
over at,
that.
oh my gosh, like I'm behind on that. The first volume's already up, but Public
Mhm.
Domain is the funniest comic I have read in years. And he's not doing the art for that, but he has a lot
I
more
thought he
say in that.
is.
I think
I
I
thought he's
think he
drawing
did.
that.
I got confused if with Batman. That's Jorge
Okay.
Jimenez at Batman, which is the first Batman title I think I've picked up religiously in forever.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean Public Domain, which he writes and draws, is just like the funniest book I've read in so long. But what I was gonna say was like usually I'm a critic of when artists or writers, do all the work. Usually I
Mhm.
think that, your best artist or your best writer, while they can do both, there's usually something missing. Like, they're so caught up in trying to make everything good that usually it kind of lapses down. I am, your book succeeds at that because being artist minded first, I mean, there's extremely little dialogue.
Yeah.
You just kind of let the page work through everything. And what I found to be, different from some of your other stuff, I think it was your book Crimson that
Mhm.
that first kind of utilized this. It's like, you're only working in like three colors, like black,
Yeah.
white, and that like blood creepy,
RNG.
blood red orange that you're
Uh-huh.
working with. So that kind of took me back as well.
Yeah, I mean, so as far as the sort of writing artist thing, like I start with the, you know, I lay the whole comic out before, like I don't I try to make sure it reads without any words. And and that's the most important thing to me, because like you said, like comics are such a it's a visual, it's a visual first medium. It drives me nuts when I read a book and it's like, a six panel grid and it's the same face for six panels. It's so boring. And so yeah, and I've been sort of I've been reading a lot more like manga recently. And Paul Pope, I there's a Paul Pope poster behind me, but is a huge influence of mine. And so he's something that he does really well is sort of takes a lot of pacing cues from both European comics and manga and sort of synthesizes the two. Um, and that's why, with House on Fire, like I didn't, I went for a lot of so lower panel counts and just pages of just like, this is mood imagery. Like I want you to sort of feel a vibe of it. Like one of my intentions with it, like I don't name any of the characters because I want the reader to be able to insert some of themselves into the story. Like I don't comics is such like it's again like to me it's like it's such a collaborative medium between like the book and the reader, because there's so much like that the reader puts in between each panel, and it's also the most pure expression for an artist, because you're doing, I think that there's something expressed with like just your line that you you can't really put out in any other way. So I hope when people read it that they can feel something. I mean, I want it to be an emotional book. I think too frequently, culture, like we're making things that are just sort of content for content's sake, and there's no meaning. And I really want to recapture meaning. And that sounds pretentious, I'm sure, but
Well, I mean, I was curious going into it whether or not this was going to be a standalone book or if you were doing this to set up for something else. And while there's very little, and I won't spoil the ending, like there's very
Yeah.
little to be assumed by the end of the book.
Yeah.
But I mean, you have created a world in a sense. Like I had a lot of questions, and like you said, you're putting things in the story that I was applying meaning to.
Hmm.
And for the sake of our listeners who will go ahead and pick up a copy, I don't want to say anything that will taint too much. But here's the general story. This is actually pretty basic.
Yeah.
It's a husband and a wife who live out in the country, and the wife is incredibly sick. And basically, what the husband has done in this, I'll call it, for lack of better terms, this post pandemic or this post apocalyptic world that you've set
Uh-huh.
up, is he has to go into a quarantine city to basically do an exchange between him and this black market dealer. And during the exchange, shit goes down. He gets robbed. Shit gets worse, and basically, towards the third act of the book, that's where you're dealing with a more internal, personal crisis that will lay into how the story ends. And while
Hmm.
that might sound basic, folks, there's a lot that's going on in the panel work that you have to see, because it's just while that is the story, there's a lot that's happening that you're seeing throughout, that's creating this world, that's creating this character of as I called him, the husband.
Hmm.
And first off, there's so many, it's ironic this is coming around the same time as The Last of Us, which is,
Huh.
I buy, like I buy video games for the stories these days. I'm not even really good at them. I don't really play them.
Yeah,
So
I
I'm
can't
happy.
beat him.
Yeah, like I'm happy to see, especially Pedro Pascal. I'm happy to see him as Joel in The Last of Us. But it's like, while a lot of it seems familiar, you take certain elements of things that we have had to deal with post 2020, and you apply it in the book. But even though it's like, yeah, I see that, I remember that moment, for some things, it just comes up harsher.
Hmm.
And not to get too melodramatic, but Second Print Comics started in the pandemic as a result to a lack of content, as a result to a reaction in which, while the elites and the studios and everyone else are not going to deliver content, while you're just going to go ahead and just get drowned with fear porn and everything else, we will
Hmm.
go ahead and be the place where you could bullshit with your friends and talk about comic books. So, reading this in a way, it kind of brought me back to that period. And the other thing is, and I totally agree with you. Whoever is reading this is going to come at it and take away very different things depending on who they are as individuals.
Yeah.
I can firmly say that if I read this story a year ago, I would have extremely different thoughts than I am having read it now, having already been married for almost a year.
Yeah.
And that is what actually kind of hit me, because I was thinking about it from like, well, people who are not married understand this, or maybe people who have had to take care of, loved ones. What is the
Hmm.
separation between the lengths you will go for the people you love? And while that might sound like, a pejorative statement, like, of course I'll do anything for the ones I love, as your character learns, that takes on a very real fucking price towards the
Yeah.
end. And
Yeah.
that was heartbreaking to see.
Hmm. Yeah, it's I'm so glad that you sort of are you're able to more concisely explain it than I can. Um, eh, yeah, it's funny because you're right. Like the plot is simple, but it's one of those things with comics where it's like plot is only one sort of small piece of it, and I'm so glad that you sort of you were able to pull out all sorts of things for yourself, and I- you know making the book was the only way that I think I could process the pandemic. I can't make any bones about it. Like it's very much a pandemic book. I mean, it's what I did over my COVID and artistically to just figure out the world and like what are my fears? What am I worried about? What keeps me awake at night? And it shocks me that we haven't seen more art based on this or more art coming out of it. I remember, especially in comics because it's such an immediate medium in some ways. I remember when 9/11 happened and the amount of comics responding to and sort of trying to process 9/11 was insane. Um, and
I
I
mean,
think
with
that
that
was
alone, you had two types of reactions. You had like
right.
the Dark Knight Strikes Again,
Yep.
where Miller is creating a 9/11 for himself, and then you have like a John Romita Jr., Joe Quesada,
Uh-huh.
Spider-Man, where he is reacting to a 9/11. Both the
Yeah.
same topic, two very different approaches to it, but they all came out within. I mean, that Spider-Man 9/11 special came out within the year, and then The Dark Knight Strikes Again. Miller went ahead and rewrote parts of the book
Yep.
specifically to insert that.
And that, I mean, that sort of strikes again. People I think have mixed reactions to it.
I'm not a fan of it overall, but it's
Oh,
not because he does his own 9/11 with the Batmobile.
I feel like I feel like it's aged really well, but in a bad way, in the sense that so many of the topics have gotten worse. Like so many of the things that he's takes on in that book topically, like it's like, oh, all the surveillance stuff. He's correct. um, but I haven't seen that. I haven't seen any sort of like reckoning with with the pandemic. And to me, as someone who creates stuff, it's I that I needed to do something, because otherwise, like, what else? Like, it just goes stew in my head, and that's not healthy. I mean, a lot of there were, I lived in Philly at the time, and we moved out to the burbs now, but um, the I mean, Philly was rough. The the neighborhood we live in, people are still getting carjacked regularly. You get home too late and you're trying to park, and you might get carjacked for your trouble. So,
Oh, Brian Nichols, from the Brian Nichols show, lived in South Philly at the
yeah,
time, and it got so bad for him during the pandemic that him and his wife picked up and moved to Indiana.
yeah. So I mean, like, I would never do a straight autobio comic because I don't think my life is that interesting. But there is certainly, and I also think that that stuff is, unless if you're unless if you're a humorist, I don't think it really works that well. Um, but there's so much in the book that is very much born out of like reality. I just tried to dial it up a little bit to make it at least feel dystopian, not you know, um, not documentary.
Yeah, I mean the reaction we've had in terms of the stuff that can be classified as like pandemic or lockdown inspired, comics, it's all been it's only been propaganda. And I
Right.
say that in the most explicit sense. And if Mark were here tonight, he would immediately bring up his feud with Eric Larson that it resulted in Eric Larson blocking Mark because you have Mark, who's like the only Savage Dragon fan I've ever known.
The only
And
time I drew a Savage Dragon was for him.
yeah, literally, like you will never get that request again. But
Uh-huh.
I mean, in Savage Dragon, he had it so that Dragon and his children are getting the vaccine. And
Yeah.
there's a part in one of the issues where one of the kids is like, "Dad, why do we get it? We heal." And Dragon is like, "It's to send a message." And it's like that is worse than like the don't smoke cigarettes ads in the free
Yeah.
comics that like Dare would give out, where Spider-Man is like, "Listen, Hobgoblin, I've got a story to tell you about bravery." And it results in a kid arguing with his dad to try and shame him and to stop smoking. And it's like,
Well,
shut the hell up. And I mean, that's been it all. I mean, I don't know how many get your vax, report your neighbor propo comics that Marvel has come out with.
I have no
And
idea.
and I mean, DC had the entire Justice League take place in a Black Lives Matter protest and everything. It's like there's, my thing has always been, and I try and be fair to listeners because I don't want to preach to my listeners, but the thing has always been, it's like if a comic is good, if the story is good and authentic to itself, it is good, and I will never say anything about it.
Yep.
But when it's done specifically to lecture people in a way that is just condescending and kind of, dare I say, fucked up, that's where
Yeah.
you lose me. And I think the one part of the book that you did that took me off guard, and it's his last line. I'm pretty sure it's
Yeah.
his last line. So I called him the guard. He's the guy all kitted up like something out of
Mhm.
Fallout. As you know, as the husband is driving into the city, and they're bitching about like, well, you don't have this pass to get in, and this pass
Yeah.
only gets you here, and you need to wear your mask, and I need to take your temperature. Like a
Uh-huh.
lot is happening at once. And then towards the end of their first conversation, he basically bribes him with a whole wad of cash, and the
Mhm.
guard lets him in. Now, this guy is, apart from the muggers who come in to try and mug the husband later on, resulting in the big changing point in the story. I'm thinking this guy is gonna fuck him over.
Mhm.
He's the primary antagonist. No, because there's a line at the end where the guy is like, you're late, you should have gotten here sooner, but
Yeah.
whatever. You paid my energy bill for a week. As
Uh-huh.
soon as he said that, I'm like, you're not a big villain. You're just a fucking puppet. Like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. Like underneath that is a dude who, despite enforcing all this bullshit, still
Yeah.
has to pay his bills. And as soon
Yeah.
as I read that, I'm like, holy shit. I didn't
Well,
really see that. I didn't like now my whole perception of him is entirely different.
yeah. Well, because you got to think about motivations, right? I mean, that's the whole thing is what are people motivated by? And your low level enforcer, bureaucrat, whatever, I don't think they're motivated because they're doing a job and they're going to follow the order rules because they there's no critical thinking. I mean, you think about basically any sort of customer service thing that you deal with, you always have to escalate and escalate or whatever. Like the low person on the totem pole doesn't actually give a shit. They're just following their checklist. And so yeah, that was the to me it was never that was always kind of the intent is like yeah, these people exist to be bribed. I mean, especially in this kind of dystopian world where you know bribery works. At least I think with a lot of people it does. And so yeah, that was and that was a throwaway line. That wasn't even my. I was thinking like shit. How can I make it clear or how can I how do I acknowledge that this guy all this stuff and it's like
No,
okay
that's
that
the
was
one
it. Yeah.
that right there is what stuck out to me more than any other dialogue in the entire book. When he's like, "You're late, you're really pushing it, but whatever, you
Yep.
paid my energy bill." And that's not spoiling anything for anybody. That's just that is my favorite line of dialogue because right there, my whole perception changed.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I don't know that you can spoil like the story. I think if you read it, I think that the story is pretty. I think that there were like you said, like that moment. I think I subvert things, and then the other moment that we're going to avoid talking about. I think that there is a subversion there. Um,
Okay, well, let's just go ahead and I want to
well,
talk about that. So
yeah,
I'm going to give people
okay,
a warning. If you want to read it raw for the first time, go ahead and pre-order it, then come back and
yep.
listen to this because now I'm about to really bring up the part where I
We're
was
going to
just kind of
spoil
like,
the
what
plot.
the fuck happened? Okay, so okay, everyone who doesn't want to hear this is gone.
Mhm.
Does he fucking does he kill his wife? This is where
No.
I was confused. Like when he's like, so basically as he's in the city after he bribes
uh,
the guard, he goes and he exchanges a cooler full of steaks for what I can only assume is like, is an oxygen tank or something for his wife. And
yeah.
as he's delivering that back to his car, he gets mugged by two teens. He has a gun on him. He refuses to kill
Mhm.
one guy. He shoots the ground and he says run, but then his partner's just like, nah, this ain't happening. So he attacks
Mhm.
him and he shoots the kid, and then he
Mhm.
dumps his body in a garbage barge. And then as he drives back, he has that interaction because the guy gave him like 3 hours to take care of this. And then as he
Mhm.
goes home, he hooks his wife who's on a respirator or oxygen mask to this thing, and she seems to be good. But then as they're lying in bed towards the last couple pages, and he goes outside, it's like, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but when
Mhm.
they're in bed, he has some shading. He has some of that,
Mhm.
orange shading to him. I took that as he's alive, and his wife has none of it. I took that as she's dead.
Oh.
Is am
Oh.
I is, am I
This is a
reading too?
completely new reading. I've never heard this
Okay.
one.
Am
Yeah.
I am I wrong about that?
You can be right about it if that's what you think.
Fuck, no, that's not what I want to hear. Is she alive in that panel?
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, so that last page, right, is for me, it's a metaphor. I've found that a lot of people who are super comic book people keep taking it literally. But to me, um, the ending of the book is that everything's this is just feels like we're stuck on a cycle, and the way that I formed the story in the book is I was thinking like, what's like 10 more times around the stupid the 2020 clock, like where do
Mhm.
we end up? Let's do this a few more times, like where are we going to end up? And that's where I came up with that's where I kind of thought of the idea. Like it's just things are just going to get a little bit worse and a little bit worse and a little bit worse. And so at the end, he goes outside and now he's the one coughing. And it's like it
Mhm.
just got a little bit worse again.
So maybe it's
And so
because yeah, so maybe it's because I read it in a, in like a PDF format.
yeah,
So is that what was the last page, the house on fire? Or
yeah.
was that okay? Who why? He's already been through so much.
So actually, so
Why?
it's funny. So so originally the book
So she
ended on
was dead in bed.
no. Originally the book ended on that splash page of his face. And
Okay.
looking down after he says the our Father, and he ends at the he can't get past forgive us.
Yeah.
And I was talking with my dad about it, and my dad was like, everything you have in the book, it's sort of like a cycle. Like, shouldn't he just get sick at the end? And it's sort of like, I was like, that's actually a good idea, Dad. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So I added him. He's getting up. He's going to go back in the house, and then he coughs, and sort of the final page is that the house is not. In again, like this can be a Sopranos thing too. Like I kind of
Just kind of cuts to black
it's
type of
I
deal.
wasn't going to cut it to black. I wanted to show you the house on fire. And so, but I that's my intent, is sort of it's a metaphor, is that
Okay.
it just things get a
I
little
took
bit
that
worse.
very literally. I thought
So
I'm looking at that. I'm like, oh my God, he killed his wife. He's sick. He's suicidal because he killed that guy. He's just gonna be like, fuck it. No one gets the house. I hate everybody. I was very like, damn, that escalated fast.
Yeah, no, I think that that's yeah, no, my intent is a metaphor. I think that I've gotten some advanced Goodreads reviews that what one guy did not care for that at all.
I've
Um
been reading because I hate myself, Tom Taylor's Superman Son of Kal-El, where everything is just
uh-huh.
blatantly told to you and there is no room. So maybe it's
Yeah.
because I'm held back from that, where when I saw that, I'm like, damn, that just that was like the end of the Mist, the Stephen
Oh
King
yeah, where he
story where
shoots everybody.
yeah, and
Oof.
I'm just and then the National Guard pulls up the
Yeah,
flamethrowers and he's like,
that's pretty rough.
no.
Yeah,
Like
that
that's where
was
I was
that
in
was
that
a gut
same
wrenching
position.
ending. No,
Yeah.
I've also gotten people who were like, did the guy who sold him the drugs actually just sell him a bomb? And I was like, I don't know, sure, if you want to think that. I you know,
Uh,
I just to me to me it's a metaphor, but if you would like to take it any other way, that's perfectly fine. For the other thing that I kept thinking about is it's like he's giving her the shot and he's hoping it works, and it's like, who knows, you
she
know
dies suddenly.
who knows, and that's I I'm sure it's going to frustrate some people, but you know that's okay with me. I want people to read it, and like you can, I don't know, come to your own conclusions about what you want to think of it. What do you want to take away from it? I think that the guy has a conscience, like the husband has a conscience, and it's why he didn't want to didn't want to kill the guys that he mugged him, because do you really want that? Do you really need that? You know, uh, that running in your head too. It's not he was trying to get out, um without with as little trouble as possible, and there's sometimes there's a point where you can't avoid it. Um,
Yeah, it was, and this was a personal thing for me, and this is what I actually found to be very ironic when
yeah.
I opened the file that had the pages in it. There's that I think you pulled that quote from Ephesians, which is,
Mhm,
and I'm gonna butcher it, but it's like we deal not in the, in the flesh, but we deal with principalities of power.
mhm.
I think you pulled another translation of it. That was, without getting into too much detail, that was something that I recited to myself quite a bit over the last 4 months, where I
Oh,
was
really?
dealing with, as listeners will know, a lot of stuff was going on with me personally. And as I was kind of reciting that to myself, we deal not in the flesh and blood, but in principalities of power. It's, it's one of those situations where it's like you try and respond to things. And I think this is really kind of the moment where I felt like, oh yeah, like this is something like I as a husband really connect to. You will do anything for your wife. You will
Mhm.
do anything for that person. But will the things that you do come at a cost despite your intentions?
Yeah.
And going into the book, that's where I was kind of looking at it and I'm just like, this hits a bit deeper for me now than I think this would have hit if I was still a bachelor or something.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually I I think that's actually something that's going to give this book a lot of longevity. And people will pick this up to just look at it, over the years once they get a copy, because I think over time it will highlight different things about the reader's interpretation more so than just if you had just been very explicit about a lot of the details. And I
Yeah.
think it will age as the reader ages, much like any good book does.
That's what I hope. I mean, that's, you know, I with this one and, I've been thinking about, like, why make a comic? What's the point? It's not like, it's a tough market, etcetera. They take a while to do, especially if you're doing it all yourself,
Mhm.
it's tough. Um, and it's like, well, I want to say something, and I think that this is an important thing to say, and this is something that hopefully, people people can respond to. Like, I think about the sort of the best comics and books that I've read, and it's like, yeah, they do grow with you in a way, depending on when you encounter them, and then when you re-encounter them. You think about your favorite albums. It's the same way with music, where it's like, it means one thing to you when you're a certain age, and then it means a whole other thing 10 years later. So yeah, I mean, I definitely, I don't I wouldn't have made this book if I wasn't, didn't wasn't married and didn't have like things that you know, responsibilities, I guess. Yeah, like it just, like I like, I would like to make a straight ahead action book at some point again, but I don't have anything there. Like, eh, I don't want, I can't fake it anymore. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to,
All the other characters you've done have always been like, there was the one book you did, Leap M. Like
Mhm,
they're all action. Like,
yeah,
you had kind of a trope going for a while. Not that that's a
yeah.
bad thing, but that's just kind of how it was. Just reading and seeing the story of the husband, he's not a badass. He hasn't, like, I don't think he was like ex special forces or something.
No.
And all your other characters would have shot both the guys, spat
Yes.
on them,
Yeah.
driven out,
Yeah.
killed the guard, got your money back, and then driven off in an
Yes. Yeah.
explosion. None
Yeah.
of that happens here,
No.
and you feel the fear, because especially when he's looking down and then he's like, fuck, like I gotta go dispose of this body. Like,
Right.
this is dreadful. Like, this is just an average guy trying to do something that is simple, and everything just goes off the hinges. It's like, my favorite character in television in recent years is Marty Bird from Ozark.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of reading him as like a Jason Bateman character. Like, this guy is not a threat to anybody,
Yeah.
but you push a good person enough ways, and what happens, man. Like, you wanted to rob him, well, guess what? Now you're dead. Like,
Right.
and this is him. This is a good, moral person trying to contemplate that, because even though what he did in my mind is justified, I know some people might be like, well, he could have shot him in the knee or something. It's like that
No,
fight
no, you're not doing
that
that.
fight happens fast. And he
Yes.
just does what anybody would have done. And then he's just like, shit, what do I do now?
Yep. Yeah, and I think that all that so the personal like sort of link here is that uh you know uh when we were still living in Fishtown, I got jumped getting out of my car. And so, and basically all that happens is I got sucker punched from behind, and then they ran away because my car was locked. And I was thinking, like in the action movie, the guy turns around and he gets to shoot him and whatever, and you get into a big fight. In
Mhm.
reality, it's you don't know it's coming, and and shit happens, and you're like, well, that fuck, and and I fixated on like, man, I'd love to go kill those guys. And I'm like thinking that doesn't fix anything, or like that doesn't change anything. It sort of and then do I need that? Like, and then you're thinking like, shit, then there's going to be a whole family of people that probably are going to be out for me for a while. Like, like your brain fantasizes about all this justice and revenge and stuff, and then you're like, I don't know. You try to kind of like so doing the book and make like I that was sort of my way of kind of processing that bit. Because yeah, you think about it and it's like, well, and then you'd think like, I was thinking too, like, what if you get caught? Because then you're screwed, you
Oh, in my
know?
in my last book, I in my last book, How to Succeed in Politics and Other Forms of Devil Worship, I based one of the antagonists off an old boss I had, and while
Mhm.
me and him have actually like gone our separate ways, and we run into each other, and now we're cordial now. I
Mhm.
remembered at the time of writing how much pain and anger he caused me, and in the book, I have him get hit by a semi truck,
Yeah.
and it was really cathartic in that moment.
Uh-huh.
And then I was like, if this man had actually been, hit by a semi truck in the situation, how would that make me feel? And then it's just kind of like, maybe it's better to just forgive him and move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also
That's
have him get sucker punched in the book. I do a lot of mean shit to him in the
uh-huh.
book. And by the end, he actually becomes a somewhat sympathetic character because the protagonist gets more jaded. But I totally get where you're coming from with that. And I mean, that's the thing about it. Like, nobody wins.
No. No.
Nobody wins. And
Uh-uh.
that's just how it is sometimes. And in dealing with that quote from Ephesians, it's like, you could deal with the here and now, but then what do you carry with you afterwards? That's what's ultimately gonna, make things better or worse for you.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, I was, I'm a, you know, Catholic, so I suffer from immense amounts of guilt. So, so I tried to put that into the book a bit too, just because it's, it's just something that you think about. I just, I feel like, uh, for me with this and with making comics is just you may as well make something that's personal and that matters and means you know is important to you. And so yeah, I it's a the other thing that I worried about. So I read my publisher published the book The Strange Death of Alex Raymond, right? And the book posits it's Dave Sim and Carson Grubot, and so it's Sim kind of investigating the death of cartoonist Alex Raymond, and he posits a lot of the sort of comics like metaphysical sort of manifestations, right? Where these guys were drawing comic strips, and he makes it ties these comic strips to events in their lives, and how like, oh, they kind of manifested this thing. And so like I was reading that while also making the book, and I was bugging out about what I was going to manifest on myself by making the book.
Well, that just took a different turn.
And And I had texted my publisher, and because I was gonna cut the mugging, and then I
The
got
mugging is where
jumped.
everything changes.
And then I got jumped. I said,
Oh,
"Fuck."
wait, that's
I said
oh,
it's. I texted Sean.
wow.
I said the world just kind of yeah. So I was like,
That is fucking trippy.
yeah, yeah,
That is
uh-huh,
fucking wild.
yeah. So it tripped me out. So then I was like, that's it stays.
Oh my fuck.
um, yeah, yeah.
That's like divine intervention in like a weird violent way
In a
right
very
there.
bad way. Yeah.
Like, don't take it out, Matt.
Or I had already manifested it, so it was like I had already put the bad juju on myself anyways. So
Wow.
yeah.
So, you know, maybe it's an obvious question, maybe it's not, but
uh
is this just a standalone story? I mean,
to me
you did
right
a
now,
little bit
yeah.
of okay. Would you ever consider maybe not with the same characters, but maybe if the world you created, do something with it later? Has that idea
um
popped up in your mind?
yeah, I mean, the next thing that I was thinking about doing is uh is about sort of like is going to be I think it's going to be about virtual reality and sort of um the sort of constant pull for people to live inside devices basically. And it will definitely feature the same kind of cast as House on Fire in that sense. I mean, it'll be expanded a little bit. It'll be a little bit different, but to me, you know, the way I'm trying to think about the projects that I want to do for myself is investigating what are the things that I'm worried about, what are the things that I think about for the future, and I I guess what keeps me up at night, and I worry about the over technology taking over, especially the next generation, and you know um so anyway, so the next book I think is going to be a little bit about that. That's sort of the subject that I'm thinking about. And again, there's that pull between city and rural that is definitely going to be part of it. Because I think that divide is just going to keep getting bigger. And so topically to me, it's like this, do you live within technology or do you try to live, like a real life? And, you see your intention is sucked into these sort of more and more away from reality. And so anyway, so that's going to be the core conflict of the next book in my mind. And so it can
Yeah.
be viewed in some ways as a sequel to House on Fire, but um whether there won't be a continuity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like I was asking myself as I was reading this because there were some similarities to your book Crimson. And for a
Mhm.
moment, like, earlier on I was gonna ask, like, is this basically in the same, connected universe of Crimson? And I was like, no, Crimson was just entirely in tone. It's a completely
Yeah.
different thing. This is very, very much a different universe. It's not connected at the same time, but to kind of cap things off, you have kind of a writer's blurb at the end where and correct me if I'm wrong, it's where you're basically saying, when my daughter reads this one day, I want her to read this as, oh wow, this act, was this type of stuff actually happening
Mhm.
versus, oh yeah, this is just how things are.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that I think a lot of creatives struggle with when they take direct inspiration for their work. And I mean, for me, um it's hard for me to separate the fact that, like for Second Print Comics, this is a pandemic product at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And while some people wish that, because Mark and I will make jokes about, the jab and everything else, and
Yeah.
sometimes we'll mock characters in certain books, it's not it's not just because we like doing it. It's because, we have to understand the reason, which is, we can never get too jaded. We can never, get too much stuff out there, because at the end of the day, this is the escape valve. This is the
Yeah.
pressure valve for a lot of things. And, while it's a show where we just react to dumb shit and fun shit, it's never lost on us, which is why, when books like this come out, we're not worried about whether people say, well, that's too much of this, that's too much of this. It's like, it's either authentic to the story and to the characters and to the writer's intention, or it's not. You can't have it
Yeah.
both ways, where it can be one thing or another. It just is the way it is. It's like, while we'll always respect, Larson for being a good artist.
Hmm.
Chip Zdarsky, I have no clue about his fucking politics. Tom Taylor, I think is a lot of, mean things I could say, but despite the fact that he fucked up John Kent, he's still one of my
Uh-huh.
favorite writers. I mean, you can never take away like Injustice and, Deceased and stuff like that, and
Right.
Frank Miller and more and everything else. It's like, you got to respect, what the writer wanted to do was authentic to itself, and does the story stand up against the test of, is this good itself?
Yeah, and I mean, I think again, like with that note, is I just wanted to, I don't know, I feel like I I I needed to have something from me, the artist, in the some sort of statement in the book. I wanted some sort of note to kind of give it, I don't know, like, a little bit more intent, and not more intent, but like I wanted some sort of people to know that there is a human being behind it. And I think that you needed, between my note and I think with my publishers afterward, like, you one of the things that's important, and especially the dawn of AI art, is sort of reminding people that there is an importance to human agency behind creative work. Uh and I- you know I think it's something that I wanted to reinforce. But the other thing too is, like, I don't think House and Fire is a capital P political book. It is a culturally political book, possibly, but I'm not telling you anything to think. I I it's not prescriptive. It is simply, this is a possible future type of thing. It's low sci-fi, I guess. Um, and what frustrates me is when I read something that feels prescriptive, or like you say, preachy, right? Where it's telling, I want to be able to come to a conclusion as a reader when I read something, and I want to try to get something out of it and learn something, but I don't, you know, especially with a creative work, I want experience. I don't want the writer to tell me how to experience it. So,
Yeah. My favorite
yeah.
movie to say out loud, so I bug people, is Blade Runner 2049. And I mean,
Uh-huh.
I love that movie. I think a lot of people hate it just because it's
I
like
liked it
20
a
out.
lot.
I liked it too. And I mean, I came out of it, and I remember talking to a, more left-leaning friend compared to myself. And I said,
Mhm.
it's so weird. I didn't know walking in I was gonna watch a pro-life movie. And he looked at me, he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "What? You didn't come away with that?" And he was like, "No," and I was like, "Well, that's fine." I mean, Blade Runner is another film that I would, to use your words, it's a culturally political film that's
Yeah.
lowercase political. And I
Yeah.
mean, you could take a lot of things in and out of it. I mean, I think, I think movies like that. That's why, I don't like a lot of the Marvel movies coming out, because it's like, Phase One Marvel will always be what I consider the best. But there are a lot
Yeah.
of, but there are a lot of films where it's like, while I might like them, I'm not going to be watching, like, I'm certainly not going to be watching a lot of the stuff that's come out in the past 5, 6 years, 20 years from now. But
No.
I could probably pop in Blade Runner 2049, and I will have another reason to appreciate that film. And I think that's
Right.
why, not to drag things on too long, I think that's why manga is taking over more of the comic book market,
Mhm.
because people to a degree, they want to see a conclusion for stuff.
Yeah.
And, with our incessant need to constantly see shit, gender bended and rebooted and,
Yeah.
retconned and everything else, it's like, having having a good, end to a story is not a bad thing. I
It's a
think we need
great
to,
thing.
yeah, it's an amazing thing. Yeah.
I don't like continuity for that reason because people just obsess over it. And so like just tell something, get in, get out, and be done with it. And that's why all of the comics that people go back to, all of the books, all the movies are things that kind of can stand on their own. It's like you said, what worked with the phase one of Marvel is that when you went to go see Iron Man, you didn't need to know anything going in. You didn't need to, like the stinger was cute and all that, but it didn't really matter at all. All those early ones sort of like they did tie together in some ways, but they were their own thing. Whereas now it's like, well, shit, now I got to watch 20 hours worth of stuff to even figure out what the heck's going on. And on top of that, they don't mean anything. I mean, they're popcorn, which there's nothing wrong with popcorn entertainment, but like a Blade Runner for 2049 is a good way to do like the sequel reboot or rehash or whatever because it had something to say and it had some real agency about it. Um, and that's what I admire, that is that like you can make something that's both entertaining but the person who's consuming it can at least get something. And um I'm I've stopped reading a lot of comics because there's not a lot in them. But there's a ton of stuff in indie comics that's really great, like that you can you can walk away and be like, oh, this is an experience that I enjoyed taking.
So is
So
this going to be how you do things going forward? Do you plan on just, coloring and drawing your own books, or would you like to kind of toss some of the work on to other people?
no, I think that I mean I have one book that I have to finish that someone else wrote. And after I'm done with that, um, I am everything that I do from then on is just going to be 100% solo. As much as I mean, this is what I'm saying right now, but I think that's what I'd like to do because it's more fulfilling for me. Um, and you know, it's the only way I can get things done. Like I can't the book that I'm drawing that the other guy wrote. I think he's a good enough writer, and I'm but I can't tell you anything about the story because I can't remember any of it.
Mm.
Like I can look at a page of script and I can do I can thumbnail it, but I can't remember what happened before when it happens after. Like I don't have any story knowledge of it because I can't hold that information in my head. Whereas on Fire, like I can sit there with the thumbnails and I know, like I can add pages and move pages around because I know the whole thing from beginning to end in my head. Like it's all up here and I know exactly what I want to do. Um, and so working with other people complicates that. And also like at my work at Free the People, like I do video production, so I have to collaborate with other people, and which is fun. But like when I want to do comics, I want to do it all by myself and not have to listen to a single other soul.
I feel you. I feel you. Well, Matt,
you know
if people want to go ahead and pre-order their copy right now, how
Yep.
long first, how long is the pre-order going until,
it
and where can people go ahead and grab it?
It's on sale and like it's going to the printers right now. So it should be in comic shops on March 18th, and I think everywhere else on March 23rd or 25th. I'm not positive on that date, but you can buy it at Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can buy it at Target. You can go to your local comic book shop. It's available through Diamond. So if they didn't order it, you can yell at them to order copies. You can buy it directly from my publisher, Living the Line, at livingthelinebooks.com. So there's really like however you want to buy it, you can buy it. So any other bookstores, if you got like a small bookshop, they should be able to get it in for you. It's available, yeah, wherever you buy books. So
Awesome. And folks, I'll go ahead and leave links in the show notes of this episode today. Matt Battaglia, author, creator, writer, artist of House on Fire. Thank you so much for joining the program today.
thank you so much for having me on, and it's great. It's always great being on talking with you. So appreciate it.
Likewise. Folks, if you went ahead and enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you're listening to the show. And we'll be back later in the week. Remember, if there's one thing you can do, it's as simple as ever. It's read comics and change the world. Good night, America.